Good morning and welcome to Arbitrary and Capricious. I am Aaron Robinson and I'm here with,
I'm Jay Reed.
and we are your hosts. This week we will be talking about some interesting topics: Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, gerrymandering in Pennsylvania, and corruption in Peru. So we have a lot of fun things on the table for today. Before we get into those things, Jay, do we have any old news that we need to talk about?
Well, we got a lot to talk about today. And one thing I wanted to bring up first is I want to call my own foul, so to speak, in that last week in the discussion of artists and their past misdeeds, I used a painter as an example. That was Edouard Degas. I described him as a Spanish painter who painted a famous anti-war painting. He is neither of those things. Uh, um, He is French, and he's the one who's famous for painting all the ballerinas. And I don't know why, but I always mix him up with Goya, who is a Spanish painter who has a lot of very famous paintings as well. So something I'm going to try to do this week is not talk out of my ass. So.
Well, I will say this. Because I don't have enough experience with, I guess French and Spanish names, I didn't know that Degas wasn't a Spanish name, so there's no way I could have called you on that. But I will say that Goya sounds way more Hispanic, because I've seen like the Goya brand, like here in Texas, they sell like, I don't know if it's like food or vegetables or what, but I've seen that periodically.
Yeah. I should have known better. And as a self-imposed punishment, and also in recognition of the fact that we're not recording this on a 10 a.m. on a Sunday, I have decided to make this a personal whiskey cast. So
okay. You're saying that your analysis might get a little looser as we go on.
Yeah, we'll see. I think we're going to hit on some tough topics, and maybe a little bit of social lubricant might do us all a little bit of good.
Very good. Well, then let's jump right into it, because I think our first story this week really was one of the biggest ones of last week. It was the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So, Jay, do you want to take the lead on this?
Yeah, absolutely. This was a story that at first I thought that this was a case that was underreported, that people weren't talking about this enough. Then once I started to dig into it, maybe I myself overestimated a little bit. So I think it's a little bit of under and overblowing at the same time. But what I want to talk about is Facebook and Cambridge Analytica.
And really, honestly, it didn't really blow up until the calls for Facebook to do something kind of surfaced.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to talk about what happened because, I'll admit that until I really read some long form articles and listened to another couple of good podcasts, I didn't even really understand what happened or why it mattered.
Same here. I was completely confused by Cambridge Analytica being on the news. I was like, what is this? What are we talking about?
So let's go over what happened. So this all started when a Cambridge University researcher by the name of Alexander Kogan, he created a personality quiz, and he enticed about 270,000 people on Facebook to take the quiz in return for a small fee. This kind of stuff happens all the time, market research and such.
What Harry Potter character are you, Jay?
How your favorite kind of cheese determines your favorite sex position, all the good stuff.
Humans have way too much time on their hands.
They really do. I can't tell you how many quizzes I've seen in the past couple of weeks that is everyone's personality is a combination of two X characters, Friends characters, How I Met Your Mother characters, Disney princesses. Like, oh.
And here's the thing. Now we know that all these little quizzes were just dainty mining tools, right? They were just out there getting information for these companies. They don't care what, Frozen character you are. They don't give a crap about any of that stuff. This is all about data mining.
Well, actually, I guess I don't know the specifics of what this questionnaire that we're talking about that the Cambridge researcher created. I actually don't know the details of it. I was under the impression that it was more of a serious personality quiz about a person's life and their views. But was it Disney princesses?
Well, no, I don't think it was that. And that wasn't really the data they got from those questionnaires wasn't really where the scandal came from either. So it's not that data that's really at issue here.
Well, anyway.
But anyways, continuing on.
Sidetrack, but so they got about 270,000 people to take this quiz, And what happens is, in order to take the quiz, you have to essentially download the software, download the app into your Facebook. And in doing so, what these people didn't realize, the people who were taking the quiz, they didn't realize that by taking the quiz, that allowed all of the data, not only about themselves, but about all of their friends, to be collected by this researcher. So they're estimating that this touched about 50 million users.
Now, this is a technique in data mining. I believe it's called like scraping, and it's like you get access to one profile, and then in doing so, you scrape as much data from anything you can get by getting access to that profile. And this was allowed by Facebook's guidelines in 2014 and before.
Exactly. There was nothing against Facebook's rules up until that point that prohibited any app developers from creating an app that would kind of Trojan horse in by getting one person to download the app, and then that allowed it to collect the software of absolutely everybody else. So that gives me a little bit of pause to think about how many times I've gotten a Vampire Wars invitation from somebody.
Lord have mercy.
And it makes me wonder what those people did with my data. But we'll come back to that a little bit later.
They probably used it to make like better games for you, obviously.
Obviously. They saw how much I loved playing Robot Unicorn Attack in 2010.
Yeah, that's true.
So my understanding is that the data that was collected includes everything about a person: their name, address, phone number, email address, if you've given those to Facebook, but also including your posts, your pictures, everything,
and all your likes, right? Like any pages, any topics that you liked throughout your history on Facebook, they got all that data too.
Yeah, exactly. And so this researcher, I'm not sure what he did with it himself, but he sold the data to Cambridge Analytica, who is a data broker. They offer their services around the world to organizations, corporations, political campaigns, and in order to do market research and such. So this is the point where things start to break the rules, because the researcher did not have authorization to turn that data over to Cambridge Analytica.
Because I think under the Facebook rules, even though they were allowed to scrape all that data, they had to say that they were not using it for commercial uses, right?
Exactly. Because I think there was a law passed in 2011 that required tech firms to notify their users how the user's data was being used, and it's looking that like this action ran afoul of that. So Cambridge Analytica takes this data and then shares it with its own clients, one of whom happens to be the Trump campaign. Cambridge Analytica itself actually has a lot of ties to the Trump world, or the Trump world as it existed in 2016. I think something that's flying under the radar here is that Steve Bannon used to be an executive at Cambridge Analytica.
I think he actually was on the board too, once it was founded. Now wasn't this, and I might be wrong on this, but wasn't Cambridge Analytica founded because, like, I think it was paid for and founded by the Mercers, wasn't it? So that they could do this kind of research.
Exactly.
And essentially, I think it's been coined now, weaponize this Facebook data for political purposes.
Right. So just, 30 seconds, can you give a quick rundown on who the Mercers are?
I don't know exactly the full answer here, but this is what I understand based off this last election cycle, is that the Mercers are a very wealthy conservative family here in the United States. They have, through the Trump election, kind of worked with Trump, Bannon, and the Breitbart crew to get Trump elected. This was their goal. And so this was back when Bannon was on the ends with Trump, with the Mercers. He's the big alt-right champion at this time.
Right.
And so that's why I think that he was put on the board, is because he's their guy at this time. And so the Mercers, they're big money in politics, and big supporters of Trump.
Right. So Cambridge Analytica has data of Facebook users who don't realize that they have that data. And Cambridge Analytica is then selling its services to the Trump campaign. So what does that mean? Why does that matter? it means that they were able to pinpoint with scalpel-like precision different segments of the population and target them with ads and posts.
Mm-hmm.
It allowed them to lump together what they believe to be like-minded people and then sell that information to advertisers who include political campaigns, who can then target those people with the issues that they obviously care about, since we can see their likes and their comments and their pictures on Facebook.
So I want to bring in a term of art. That's what we call in the legal profession. They narrowly tailored these ads to fit the likes of the Facebook data.
It's a good term of art.
They narrowly tailored this stuff. See, this was targeted. This is like they said, this is weaponizing data. And honestly, this isn't a whole lot different than what Russia was doing during this election. Is they were harvesting data, determining what the people liked, how they would respond to different type of information, and then abusing that to try and shift public perspective and opinion.
Yeah, that's exactly what was happening.
And it doesn't really look great whenever our president is using the same tactics as Russian spies.
No, not at all.
Especially when there's, accusations of collusion.
Right. So on Facebook's watch, they have allowed these kind of shadowy figures to gain our data and then use it to influence us in our elections. So what was Facebook's response? What did they do? Well, they were notified of this breach in December 2015. That's when they found out that Cambridge Analytica had the data. But it took them 8 months to do anything about it. And what they did was send a cease and desist letter. Basically, they just asked Cambridge Analytica to stop using the data and delete the data. But from what I've read, there isn't any indication that Facebook followed up and ensured that Cambridge Analytica had, in fact, deleted the data.
And had they done that back in, was it 2015? Then
yeah, they found out about it December 2015, didn't do anything about it until August 2016.
And we know that data was used in, very high fashion throughout the 2016 election.
Exactly. And so we have a whistleblower come forward within the last month. All of this becomes public. Mark Zuckerberg has to go on an apology tour. He's promising, we made a mistake. We're going to make changes. We're not going to allow third-party app developers to have access to your data like this. So this brings up the question, is it time to quit Facebook?
I think it's an interesting question. Also, I think that if you don't know that people are like data mining you on a social media website, then you're a little bit naive. I mean, sure. Who doesn't go on and Google something and then in an hour they're getting advertisements, on their Google page for something that they're searching for? I mean, everybody's doing it. Everyone's data mining it. I think the thing that really makes people frustrated is it's not Facebook who's using the data. It's not Google who's using the data. The people we know, we signed up with, we have agreements with, but it's these third parties, and they're taking data from other people who didn't ever have an agreement with them. Honestly, I think that's where the issue lies. And yes, I think Facebook dropped the ball, but I don't think necessarily this is Facebook's fault. And the reason why I say that is that in 2014, when they realized this was happening, they did change their policy. They did realize, hey, we shouldn't let this keep going. So they did realize that's bad, and they did do something to change it. They didn't really follow up with everything that happened before then, though.
So I guess are you saying that it's more just Facebook is the one who's gotten caught?
No, I feel like Facebook. It's not necessarily they got caught. They definitely dropped the ball, but I don't think it was necessarily Facebook. I think it's these third-party apps. That's the issue here. If they move forward and they regulate what data that third-party apps can access, I don't have as much of a concern. Also, I know that they have my data, Cambridge Analytica, because I got weird Tea Party level advertisements all throughout this last election. And I was like, why the hell am I getting these? I've been a hardcore liberal my entire life. Why am I getting stuff saying that Ted Cruz is running? I don't care. So I assume that this data is only as good as, as the person, because
Mhm.
if you don't put a lot of stuff on your Facebook that they can garner information from in that regard or politically, they're guessing based off of other people with similar likes.
Mhm.
you know
It's funny that you bring that up, because I got an email this week from another social media platform saying that I had in the past followed or like retweeted, reblogged a post from an account that has been determined to be linked to the Russian trolls.
Oh wow.
And that was a little bit of a shock to me. I guess I can just go ahead and say it was Tumblr, and
Yeah.
that made me laugh because if you know me or if you've ever seen my Tumblr, which very few people have, it's memes and gifs, like it's
Jokes.
it's jokes. It's like stuff from TV shows I like or the sports that I watch. It's funny gifs of people like slipping and falling and doing silly things.
What was it? What would you share? What were the Russians trying to get you to spread?
that it didn't tell me. All it did was tell me who the account was. And I've actually, because of some fiascos, I've like lost access to that Tumblr. Like it was based on my old student email address, and now I forgot the password and it got locked, and I can't get them to reset it without the email. You know how it goes.
Yeah.
So I don't have access to that account anymore. So I haven't been able to actually go back and look at what the Office meme the Russian trolls were trying to get me to spread. But I think it does demonstrate that I thought that there was no way that this infiltration, this meddling in the election could have affected me, and turns out it might have.
Now, the level of effect may have not been that high, but you're right. I mean, it reached out to people that you wouldn't expect. Most people, in fact, who are affected by this, I think they interviewed some people who were like, so here, on this date, you shared this fake news article from Russian spies. And their response is, yeah, we don't care.
Yeah.
They just, we don't care. We want
but her emails.
Yeah. But her emails. Oh, God.
Right.
So one thing I do want to bring up is that the whistleblower is actually a more important figure than I feel like most people know, because he was the guy who came up with the whole system of taking the data and determining what people like, don't like, and then trying to use that and in some way to predict behavior. And so he was like a fashion student from Canada. And he's coming up with this theory on determining people's behaviors based off of their likes on social media. And he's wanting to use it to determine what the next fashion trends are. And Bannon and Cambridge Analytica take this system and turn it into a political weapon.
Isn't that amazing?
Isn't that amazing? But so he's the whistleblower, this guy that they took everything from and built the whole system off of, who was trying to do something rather innocuous. And they turned it into a weapon. And I love his quote. And I wish I knew his name. I just don't off the top of my head. But his quote was, "I was doing this for fashion, not fascism." That's such a great quote. So I'm glad that he came forward and he said something, because we wouldn't know that this was happening. And oh my goodness, Lord have mercy, how many times do we hear the Republicans complain about the DNC paying for the Steele memo? The memo that has all the naughty things that Trump did in Russia in it. Oh my God, it's so. It's unverifiable. It's paid for by political purposes, blah, blah, blah. You guys are paying people to weaponize Facebook data illegally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, shame.
And have you heard the details of what Cambridge Analytica was caught on camera offering to other clients?
It was something like we can use women, prostitutes, escorts to pressure political opponents into all these weird situations. I mean, this is the mob. That's what the mob does.
Yeah, British journalists posed as people who wanted to influence a Sri Lankan election. So they go to Cambridge Analytica with hidden cameras, and they meet with it wasn't even with like some flunky, some lackey offering this. It was the CEO. The CEO is on camera talking about how they can pose as researchers or sex workers in order to entrap politicians, get them into untoward circumstances, or also offer them bribes, but like make it a sting, like film them accepting the bribe so that then they can post the video of them accepting the bribe on the internet. It's nuts.
That is advertising blackmail. You are advertising blackmail. This is your company, Steve Bannon.
Right.
These are your political.
No, I don't.
Trump.
I don't believe there's any evidence that they did do this in America, but I mean, no smoke without fire. Like, if this is your MO, what did you do? And I'm sure this is the only one to be uncovered as of now. What did the others do?
I'd like to take this moment to remind our audience that President Obama went 8 years without having to hire a lawyer.
We can get into Obama's legacy on another day.
Doesn't have to have a lawyer, does he? I'm just saying, having bad decisions and committing treason are very, very different levels of culpability.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. But we can talk about that on another day.
All right. So, well, I'm not going to delete my Facebook. I don't really use it that much. I use it for following stories and keeping in touch with a few people that I like to.
And arguing with people?
And arguing with people, Lord have mercy. Some people drag me into arguments. I have a friend who will tag me and just be like, Aaron, come in here and drop the hammer.
I've been tempted to do that sometimes. Honestly, I've thought about that sometimes, because there have been a few times when I see that, like, you make a post about the Second Amendment or something, and I'm like, oh, here we go again. And I come back, even an hour later, and it's like 109 comments. I'm like, oh, Aaron got into it with the trolls again.
Well, you can just say that I definitely bait the trolls. I mean, I'm not going to deny this. I mean, you want to have a conversation? Let's have a conversation, but it's going to be fun for me at least.
Yeah, and I think once we can figure out on the technical side how to patch in a phone call, and we can start taking phone calls from the alt-right, I think this podcast is going to hit a whole new level.
Yeah. There also might be new sound levels that we hit as well. There's going to be some yelling.
Yes, there will. Yes, there will. But to bring it back to Facebook, I think you said that you wouldn't delete your Facebook at this point, and I'm of the same mind as well. I kind of feel within myself that I'm one of those people who was a little bit duped by Facebook in the beginning, that it was it's this great platform that's completely free where you get to connect with all the people who you care about and care about you. You also get to stalk your old girlfriends and post your travel photos to make them jealous. But now I've been sort of almost entrapped where a lot of those photos only exist on Facebook. I don't have those memory cards, those computers anymore, and I didn't do a good job of saving that data. So now the only place where those photos exist is Facebook. And if I'm gonna delete Facebook, what I'm gonna have to do is go picture by picture, download the image and save it, and then go delete the Facebook.
I don't disagree with you. That's a great point, but I'm pretty sure at some point someone will say there's an app for that, and you can just download all your pictures in one fell swoop.
Oh, that'd be great. And to any of our tech-savvy listeners out there, I'm looking to commission some software. But I wouldn't say that this scandal in and of itself is going to cause me to dump Facebook, because it's like I said, it's 270,000 people whose data were taken initially, then 50 million others, but 50 million out of a billion Facebook users, or is it
you're right. That's a small sample. Now, as Facebook said themselves, we don't know what other software, got. We don't know what other groups got during this time period that Cambridge Analytica was farming. So we just don't know that information. We don't know who has it. We don't know what they did with it. And I think Facebook came out and said, we're working to figure that out. Now, they may never figure that out, but it's kind of hard to put Pandora back in the box.
So they've promised to make some reforms on how they protect and handle data. And I think the lesson here is I hope they do.
Yeah, same here. I mean, this is the lesson that we've been learning as a culture for the last, 10 years. That just because you create the internet, you create infrastructure, you create all these great digital, services, you still have to create security. You have to protect those things, We have hackers. We have constant breaches of data. We have people stealing, identity, credit card information, whatever that may be. So we have, as a society, lagged behind on taking care of the security that our infrastructure needs. And I think that hopefully, because of all this, because of Russia, meddling, because of Cambridge Analytica, data mining, we start to really look and say, hey, let's draft some rules here.
Mm-hmm.
I've said this a few times. We live in the Wild West of the internet still.
Mm-hmm.
This is pre-statehood territory. Not a whole lot of regulation or rules. A lot of things go right now, and it's fun. It's great. Capitalism loves to shout how great no regulation is, but we see that you need stuff. You need protections. These systems are set up for so many different people and use so many different ways that you have one little, loophole or exploit, and all of a sudden, boom, tons of data is just pouring out of these things.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to address this as a society.
Absolutely. If Facebook is allowed to profit in the way of billions of dollars a year based on the data that we give them for free, they should be held to a standard. They should be required to protect that data.
It's true.
Simple as that. Let's shift gears a little bit. You seen any weird news this week, Aaron?
I did see some weird news this week. I'm going to give a shout out to my father because he was the one that sent me this story. But we have clone wars going on in professional polo across the world. So the Vanity Fair is reporting that one of the greatest polo players ever, Adolfo Cambiaso, has been competing on a horse that died nearly a decade ago. He has cloned his beloved stallion, the Aiken Cura, and now has 25 replicas of his champion horse.
Wait, he cloned the horse.
He cloned the horse, and he now has 25 clones of his horse.
Wow.
So the story is really, really interesting. In a 2006 polo championship, Adolfo was riding on his horse, the Aiken Cura. And
this is the original one, right?
This is the original horse.
Okay.
This is the prime horse. He was riding it in this championship and decided to give it a break. As he was bringing it to the sidelines, its leg buckled and it fell. And he jumped off the horse and began screaming, "Save this one, whatever it takes." But ultimately, the horse had to have its leg amputated, and they were forced to euthanize it. But before he said his final goodbyes, he had the vets take some DNA to store for the future. Fast forward some time, and the future has arrived. And Adolfo, with some help of some friends, sets up a company that cloned his beloved horse. He just named them. They're all named the Aiken Cura, and it's like 1 through 25. So that he just
like George Foreman's children.
Yeah, just like George Foreman's 1, 2, 3. So he has these extra horses. I keep thinking like a golfer. Like the golfer has like his bag of clubs. He's got like his stable of prized horses, but it's all the same horse. But
wow.
So the company has now cloned 45 versions of the horse, and they're selling them internationally at $120,000 a pop. But for now, Adolfo has a reservoir of champions ready to hit the field. And he says, although they are exact clones genetically, they do have different personalities. And that's the thing that's the most interesting about this story is, with regards to skill, muscle, all this stuff, they're the same. He can push it the same way, but each horse developed its own individual personality.
Interesting.
So that to me was the most interesting thing about this story. Because you think about identical twins. Identical twins, genetically identical, very just the same, right? But then they're completely different people, or at least they can have very different personalities. So different likes, different tastes, flavors, stuff like that.
You said these were polo horses.
Yes, these are polo horses. So this is. I don't know if this is like extended beyond polo international. I feel like if they were cloning horses here in America for the Kentucky Derby, that would be on every news station.
Oh yeah, because that's immediately what my mind went to was horse racing. That might be the gambling addict inside of me struggling to get out. But I think about like, what if we clone Secretariat?
Yeah,
and I would hope that the rules of horse racing prohibit such an action, but this could be another example of they never even considered that could be a possibility, so they never made it a rule.
Well, that's exactly what happened in polo. So there's no genetic modifications to the horse. This horse is a horse. I mean, it was born in a lab. It was, it's a clone of a prior horse, but at the end of the day, it has no genetic modifications. It hasn't been altered. It is exactly the same horse. And so there are no rules against it. Now, there's rules for modifying, for cheating, but they argue it's not cheating because this horse competed, it qualified. There was nothing wrong with the horse. It just got old, and they had to put it down. So I think we will see probably ultimately some type of regulations for these type of sports where this could be used. But in the article, it said that they're already breeding these cloned horses because he does like one every year, and so he'll have like the horse at different ages so that he's not always riding the older horse. He can ride a younger horse or fresher horse, whatever. But they're breeding them, so that means that they are genetically the same. My question though is, if you're breeding all the same horse, at some point you're going to have crossover, right? I
suppose if you do it for long enough, you're going to dilute the genetic pool.
Yeah. So I think that would be the biggest concern, is maybe not allowing the cloned horses to breed, which would probably drop their value substantially.
Oh, yeah. Because, imagine even, like, let's say that they make it illegal for you to race cloned Secretariat, but there's no rule against cloned Secretariat siring another racehorse.
That's true. And technically that Secretariat didn't win any races.
Yeah, that's true. Jeez.
So it raises a lot of equine questions, I guess you could say.
Well, because one of the oldest debates in sports is, could the old guys, the old legends, could they defeat the current stars? Well, what if we just cloned up Michael Jordan and had him play against LeBron James?
It's an interesting question. I mean, we see people are constantly breaking records, right? Humans are pushing past what we considered to be world records throughout history. So I don't know. This is an interesting question. Also, though, I would argue that whenever Babe Ruth set the record for home runs, did he really have to keep going after that once he set the record? Whereas those who come after him say, okay, this is the new record. I'm shooting for something beyond that. Do you see? Does that make sense? They only needed to go so far to set the record. There's no reason. It's like whenever, any football team's playing the UNT Eagles, they don't need to score 150 points to the 7 that UNT had scored. They cut it off at some point. And so I'm wondering, what about these old guys, the legends? Maybe it's just that they didn't need to do any more than that.
They didn't need to try as hard.
Yeah,
what you're saying.
Well, I'm just saying. I'm just saying. The difference between I don't know. I'm not a baseball guy, so I don't know how many home runs Babe Ruth hit versus, Sammy Sosa or the other guy. But, what was the difference? Was it they hit 2 more than him, or they hit 100 more?
Well, I think so. I want to say the record that stood for a long time for season home runs was 62 or 63. That was set by Roger Maris in the 60s. Because Babe Ruth was back in the 30s, 40s. I'm kind of bad with baseball history, but I want to say now it's 75. I think Barry Bonds hit 75. Okay. So we went from 62 to 75, but that was with steroids.
I was going to say, wasn't there were some enhancements there?
Oh yeah, there's a big asterisk all over any baseball stats from about 1999, or probably even earlier than that, till about 2010. Yeah, but the kind of conventional wisdom is that improvements in sports science, particularly with nutrition, allows the current athletes to do more than they could before, because before they were drinking beer and smoking cigarettes at halftime, but now they're taking saline IVs.
Yeah, no, I could see that. If the machine is running better, then it's going to have better performance.
Right. Exactly.
That's interesting.
But this leads to my weird news story. I don't think it's anything new, but would you believe me if I told you that Tinder has reduced home field advantage in the NBA?
I mean, I don't have any reason not to believe you, but that's weird.
Right. So basically, I mean, I don't think there's any, there's like no study to prove this. This is just sort of a theory. But basically, the theory goes in the old days when you were a basketball player, you spend about half your time on the road. You're a young athlete. You want to get some. But in order to get some, you have to go out to the club. You got to drink some booze, have some shots, meet a girl, dance, go back to your room, do your thing. By that point, it's like 4 a.m. and you got a game to play the next day, and you're going to be hungover tomorrow because you've been drinking and dancing at the club. Now, on the plane, you can swipe through Tinder, find the girl you like, have her waiting in your hotel room when you get there. Don't have to drink, don't have to go out. You can kick her out by 11 and you're good to go. So I think what I read was since like 2013, the home court advantage statistically has shrank by about 2.5 points in the NBA.
Interesting.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
It's changing the world. Internet.
Changing the world. Changing the internet.
Also, Tinder probably needs to be investigated to see if they are just escorting. So,
you know what? Now that you bring that up, have you ever used Tinder before?
I have.
So when you log into Tinder, it asks you to provide your Facebook information, right? Like that's how it determines how old you are.
If you're a real person.
So and if you're a real person, exactly. So if Mr. Cambridge was able to get all our data, do you think Tinder did too?
You'd have to see if Tinder launched their app back before the 2014 shift, and any data that they got before 2014, in theory, they could have. Yeah.
Interesting, man.
Because I think the way that system works, it like tells you, oh, this person's friends with this person, that you might know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good point. It's a good point. Well, so the end of the home field advantage because of technology. Let's now go back in time to the 1800s and talk about gerrymandering.
Heyo. Do you mean Gerrymandering?
Gerrymandering. So basically, I like this story because most people don't know where gerrymandering comes from, but I'm going to start here. The word gerrymander was originally written Gerry, Gary, I guess, mander, was used in the Boston Gazette March 26, 1812. The word was created in reaction to a drawing of the Massachusetts State Senate election district under Governor Elbridge Gerry. So it was
Elbridge
under
Gerry.
Yeah, Elbridge Gerry. Sorry, we're not in the 1800s anymore. So the governor signed this bill that redistricted Massachusetts to benefit his Democratic-Republican Party. And one of the journalists said that the new district looked like a mythological salamander, and thus gerrymandering was born. So now we're going to fast forward from 1812 to 2010, Pennsylvania. Back at this time, because I wasn't there and I don't remember this, but the Republicans had just won a landslide victory in Pennsylvania. They took the governor's office and regained their majority in the House of Representatives. Now, this is right after the 2010 census, or I guess this is right before it. And so the Pennsylvania Republicans had the full control of the state in redistricting the new districts for the next session. So, and this was apparently the second time this has happened in a row in 2 decades for Pennsylvania. So in 2011, the Republican leaders introduced a congressional redistricting map, or a bill that contained neither a map nor a description of their new congressional lines. Okay, so we're starting with just a blank check first and foremost. They ultimately do add some lines into the bill, but one of the Republicans in the House, the Pennsylvania House, actually came out and said that all you have to do is look at this map to see it appeared to be specifically drawn to dilute Democratic votes and was the perfect example of why redistricting reform is needed. Despite this objection, the House and the Senate passed this new map in 2011 in December, and the governor signed it into law. So this kind of sets the stage. We have this very pro-Republican map that's drawn by the Republican legislature. It dilutes Democratic votes, and it goes into effect. Okay? Now, in June of 2017, the League of Women Voters in Pennsylvania filed a lawsuit alleging that this existing congressional district lines were unconstitutionally gerrymandered to favor Republicans in the state. And so the court took a look at the map, And they ultimately agreed with actually, first the district court looked at it and said, yes, it is gerrymandered. Yes, it benefits the Republicans, but no, you have no basis. You have no claim. It didn't violate any state law. And so they appealed that up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, the Constitution, the Supreme Court Constitution gives all these people a right to representation. So clearly, this map plainly and palpably violates the state constitution. So they struck down the 2011 map, and they basically gave the General Assembly like 3 weeks to come up with a new map and submit it. So instead of doing that, they decided that the House Republicans instead decided to appeal the decision to the United States Supreme Court and asked the court to stay the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's decision. That was denied on February 5th, 2018. They had 4 days to submit their new map, and they failed to do it. Mm-hmm. So on February 19th, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court released their own new map, and it's set to take effect for the May 15th, 2018 primaries. Okay? So we have a new map. They rejected all the maps that were drawn by amicus brief, by the Democrats, and the Republicans apparently failed to even submit one. So the justices drew their own. Now, I thought this was really interesting because after they released this new map, the GOP once again went to the Supremes and asked them to intervene and prevent this map from going into effect. Again, the Supreme said, no, we're not going to wade into this. So now the Supreme Court has twice denied to review this decision. The map is going into effect. And what this new map that the Supreme Court, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court had drafted does is it makes all of the districts more competitive. So the current, the prior map gave the Republicans a 13-5 advantage over the Democrats. Okay, that's a huge, huge majority in that state. This would make every single district competitive to where it could go either way. So there's a chance that it could go 50-50 in this next election in Pennsylvania, which would just completely crush the Republican majority. So clearly the Republicans are not happy about this. So when you can't go to the Supremes, whenever your own court won't listen to you, what do? Well, some of our House members in Pennsylvania decided that the next step was to impeach the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And so they drafted
the justices?
Yeah, they drafted articles of impeachment for the 4 Democrat justices on the bench, the 4 who voted for it. Now, number one, impeachment is rare, just generally. And if we're talking about impeachment like that people would even understand or recognize, the Constitution says that impeachment's only available if there's high crimes or treason. Okay? Mm-hmm. So usually you don't impeach someone because of their decision on the bench. It's usually some type of conduct outside the bench, bribes, doing something like extremely illegal that gets you impeached. Apparently not treason right now, but that's because we have So, needless to say, the GOP legislature, some of them decided to move for the impeachment. Now that doesn't succeed. But in a very rare turn, the Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court actually addressed the legislature through a press release. Okay? Now, this is where things I think are really interesting, is that he's a Republican. He's not a Democrat. And he came out...
The justice being impeached is a Republican.
No. The Chief Justice, not being impeached, not being targeted, is a Republican. And he spoke out against the legislature. Mm-hmm. He actually... Let's see here. I actually have his quote. As Chief Justice, this is his statement, and his name is Thomas Saylor. As Chief Justice of Pennsylvania, I'm very concerned by the reported filings of impeachment resolutions against the justices of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania related to the court's decision about congressional redistricting. Threats of impeachment directed against the justices because of their decision in a particular case are an attack upon an independent judiciary, which is an essential component of our constitutional plan of government.
He's absolutely right. That's exactly what it is.
Right. Absolutely. This is exactly what it is. This is, I don't like this decision, so I'm impeaching you. It has nothing to do with whether or not they are doing anything impeachable.
This sounds like what happens in failed democracies. Like, this is what happens in Venezuela when Maduro didn't like the way that the legislature was going. He dissolved it and made his own. Like, this shouldn't be happening in America.
It shouldn't be happening in America. You're right on. And I mean, honestly, the thing that's crazy to me is that the judiciary is the one thing that stands in the way of government overreach. This is the one thing. And could you imagine like Eisenhower saying, "Oh, Supreme Court, you just handed down board, what was it, Brown versus Board of Education, desegregate the schools." No, we're not going to do that. New Supreme Court, you're all fired. Like, the court being able to force society to move is what has caused us to become a better society.
Right.
Now, this is not the same level, obviously. This is redistricting, and gerrymandering is a political issue. But I'm just saying,
there is precedent for meddling with the Supreme Court. I think FDR famously tried to add justices to the Supreme Court in order to dilute the effects of the ones who went against him.
Well, yes, this did happen. He threatened to, after they struck down, I think, the second attempt to try and do some type of quasi-social programs to save the economy. They struck down 2 of them, and then whenever Medicare or Social Security came up, he basically kind of signaled to them that if they vote against this one, I'm going to stack the court 3 for everyone that voted against it. And then all of a sudden they found that was constitutional. So yes, you're right. The standoff between the president and the Supreme Court has happened in the past. But also the situation I think that FDR was facing, substantially different.
It's a little bit different, but I think also I jumped the gun. So they've initiated the impeachment proceedings. So what has happened?
It did fail.
Okay.
It wasn't. They didn't initiate the proceedings. What it was that some of the GOP congressmen drafted the articles of impeachment. So that would be the document that they would have voted on to determine whether or not impeachment would go forward.
Gotcha.
And so it ultimately did fail. It didn't move forward. But the fact that this was happening and that the Republican Chief Justice spoke out against the legislature. I mean, he voted against the map too. He didn't vote for this map, but the integrity of the court is such an important function in our society that he had to say something, I think.
Absolutely. And I think it's a credit to our democracy that this silly gambit from the Republicans failed. That's just political maneuvering at its worst. I can't stand that. And
to be fair, gerrymandering is not a Republican only problem. It is definitely a national problem. Both sides are doing it. It needs to end. We need to have a real solution. And honestly, the Supremes do need to speak on this matter. The 9 need to come down and tell us what to do on gerrymandering.
I think they need to find that it is not acceptable to determine a district based on a person's political stance, because as the law stands at its present, it's completely legal to do so.
Absolutely. I remember being in Texas, I was a little young, but do you remember like after, I think it was the 2000 election, like they had just finished the census, just finished doing the districts, and then like 2 years later, the Texas Republicans redistrict Texas and diluted the Democrats again. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is like what historically has been a bastion of conservatism, but that's kind of starting to change now.
Yeah, I think it's the meaning of what it really means to be a conservative. That definition is changing, and the Republicans are going in one direction, and everybody under 30 and also everyone who's not white is going in a completely different direction.
That's true. Well, and also with Texas, to be fair, due to the economy over the last 10 years, we've had a lot more people moving here from very different parts of the United States than historically. I've met more people from Michigan, from Wyoming, from Wisconsin, places that you don't think about, I guess, usually moving here.
A lot of transplants.
A lot of transplants because they're jobs. Well, they're bringing their views with them. They don't check that at the border.
Mm-hmm. And not to mention the growing Latino population is being told by the Republicans that they don't deserve or belong here and they need to get out. So do you think they're going to vote for the Republicans? No.
Yeah.
Hell no.
every time Trump brings up that stupid ass wall, I mean, that's just pushing Hispanic voters away from him.
Yeah, he threatened to shut down the government this week over not funding the wall. It drives me nuts.
I saw a meme. I saw a meme this week. It was like, good news, Mexico's agreed to pay for the impeachment.
Oh God, that's great.
Well, very good. Well, that's kind of where we're at now. The map looks like it's going ahead. The failure of the federal Supreme Court to intervene has left the Republican GOP with very little to do. I guess after the next census, they could redraw, but at that point, the effects of this map will already be felt, and there will be a new legislature, new Senate, and new districts. And so the likelihood of them being able to gerrymander it again is very low. Now, what I think this does do, and I think some of the commentators put it this way, is they said this was a politically a politically blind drawing. It did benefit the Democrats in certain senses, that it didn't penalize them for some of their I guess more dense areas of population. You know, Philly, Lord have mercy, that whole city's blue, and they kind of divided that up so it's not one district. But at the end of the day, the legislature is going to be more balanced between the Republicans and the Democrats, which is going to require more cooperation, more compromise. And honestly, I think that is where America is at its best, is whenever we're compromising. You can have strong opinions, you can have strong views, but at the end of the day, I believe this country was founded on compromise, and that's what helps us push forward, is compromising and realizing you don't get conservative America or liberal America. You get America. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of different views of what that means.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%, that there is a fundamental lack of compromise that in our political system at the moment. And I hope that having a more balanced or a more representative legislature in Pennsylvania would foster more cooperation. But to look at the national Congress, you know, it's been about 50-50 for a while.
Except for the House. The House has been gerrymandered in their favor for quite a while now.
But I mean, the distribution of Republicans to Democrats has been about 50-50 for a while. And, you know, they're not doing shit.
This is true. I mean, I wouldn't say they're not doing shit, because Trump did get a $1.5 trillion tax cut passed. So,
you know what?
That is something.
That's true.
But that's the thing. There was no compromise in that. Mm-hmm. You know, because they don't have a filibuster-proof Senate, they do have to compromise on some things. But as we saw with Gorsuch, they're not afraid to go nuclear and just screw the filibuster. Mm-hmm. So, honestly, I think we need to make the filibuster like part of law. I think that needs to be a part of the Senate like structure and not be able to be changed by the majority party on a whim.
Mm-hmm. It's the protections for the minority against the majority should not be susceptible to erosion by the majority.
Yeah,
you shouldn't let the people you're trying to stop from being tyrants change the rules to allow themselves to be tyrants.
No, it's a great quote. Great quote.
Thank you.
I don't know if you were pulling that from somewhere or reading it, but that's fantastic. That exactly describes the issue we have with the filibuster.
Well, I was talking out of my ass again, but thank you for the compliment.
Well, thank your ass.
You're welcome, man.
So we will see how this new map affects the Pennsylvania election. And yeah. It should be an interesting one, because last kind of final thought, if you remember, during the Obama election, there was that famous Pennsylvania congressman who said that these voter ID laws that we're passing are going to ensure that Obama doesn't win. You know, mm-hmm. I mean, partisan politics has been a huge thing in Pennsylvania for a while now. So to see them address gerrymandering, hopefully this is kind of the domino that starts it going across the nation.
Yeah, and they had that gubernatorial candidate who had the affair with the hooker, and then the vice president's henchman had to kill the hooker. And
what are you talking about? Where this just came out of left field?
Have you seen House of Cards?
Okay, Lord have mercy. I was completely lost there.
No,
Okay,
that didn't actually happen.
Didn't actually happen. I was like, what news have I not been reading?
No, that was on the show that we're not allowed to watch anymore.
Well, remember the new season they dropped him. It's all going to be about Claire.
Yeah, and it's gonna suck. I shouldn't say that. We'll see. We'll see.
I don't know. I didn't actually see the final season or the fourth season of House of Cards, so I'm not caught up.
It's just that whole show is carried by Kevin Spacey's just this charisma of like, God, I hate him and he's a terrible person, but I kind of want to see him push more people in front of subway cars.
Yeah. Spoiler alert.
I didn't say who he pushed in front of the car or didn't push.
But a car was involved.
Yeah, but there's a scene in the subway. It's great.
All right, well then let's move on from there. I think the next segment is viewer questions. Jay, you have
check the
some
mailbag.
viewer questions?
Let's check our Gmail. For anybody out there who's interested, you can send us
also real quick before you get to that.
Yeah.
Do we have mailbags anymore? Is that a thing that people have?
No. I guess I watched a lot of Letterman growing up.
No, it's valid. It's valid.
Yeah, maybe it's rubbed off on me a little bit. But viewers out there, if you want to send us your questions, any arbitrary and capricious question at all, we are happy to answer. You can send those to arbitrarycapriciouspodcast@gmail.com. You can also tweet at us. We've got a Twitter. We are on Twitter at ArbCapPodcast. That's ARBCAP podcast. You can also use the hashtag ArbCapPod. So let's check the mailbag. Let's see if we got any questions this week. Looks like we got an email from Christy in Dallas. All right. So Christy asks, number one, who is your favorite president?
Oh, well, I think I'd have to say, and to be fair, I don't know everything that this president did over his presidency, but I definitely really like a quote from his. So I'm going to say Teddy Roosevelt. And it's partly because I love our national parks. Like, my family went on road trips my entire childhood. Every summer, we drove across this country. We went to parks. We went to museums. We went anywhere we could. And that is something that is just great memories, great experiences, beautiful world. That's something that future generations need to be able to experience. And it was the vision of Teddy Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, that brought that and preserved that for me and for future generations. We've already seen Trump has been reducing the size of our, national parks and selling off parts of it, which is just absolute garbage. And, I think that's something that we need to take care of. Additionally, he has one of my all-time favorite quotes. And this is a slight paraphrase, but this is pretty much it. It's easy to lead hearts and minds when you have them by the balls.
I like it.
Yeah, that's my favorite Teddy Roosevelt quote. Also, the fact that he ran as Republican and then didn't get the nominee and then ran as like was it a Bull Moose Party?
Yeah, the Bull Moose Party.
The Bull Moose Party. Like, he was going to run no matter what. So,
yeah, I want to say like the actual name of it was like the Anti-Masonic Party or something like that. Something crazy from turn of the century politics that we wouldn't even recognize now. Yeah, but Teddy Roosevelt, I think, is one of those fascinating historical figures that he's always going to be interesting.
He's always going to be interesting, whether it's the Rough Riders, whether it's, his presidency, whether it's his ridiculous quotes that are just very fun to throw out at a party.
Yeah. Have you ever been to the Alamo before?
I have been to the Alamo.
Right next to the Alamo, I'm blanking on what it's called, but there is a pub in an old hotel in downtown San Antonio, right next to the Alamo. That is it's the bar where Teddy Roosevelt recruited the Rough Riders.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah.
There's like a plaque on the wall with it, and then there's like an additional layer to it where the bar is actually a recreation of a real pub in London that whoever owned the hotel just like really enjoyed this pub and wanted to recreate it. So, whenever I'm in San Antonio, if I have time, I like to go get a drink there.
Well, that's cool. That's a really interesting piece of history. What about you, Jay? Your favorite president?
Favorite president? Well, I think I want to kind of continue along your logic where you said that, there's a lot of things this president did that weren't okay, but there were a lot of things I liked about him. And I would say Andrew Jackson. I think this is a choice that is not going to wear well with history, but the reason why I like Andrew Jackson is that he was famous for having a policy of kind of an open door to the White House.
Yes,
where
yes, he did.
If you were a citizen and you had a grievance and you wanted to talk to the president about, whatever was important to you, he had the kitchen door open and you could go talk to Jackson about it.
Do you know what else he had in the White House when people came to visit?
What's that?
A giant block of cheese.
Oh,
multiple
really?
tons sitting in the foyer for people to come and have a nibble while they're waiting to talk to the president.
Well, that's just courteous.
It's just courteous. This is fantastic. The reason why I say it's fantastic is I've been watching through The West Wing, entire episode about the Andrew Jackson Day, the cheese day, when the people come into the White House and talk to the staff.
Wow.
So I just thought that was funny.
That is interesting. And I want to say when he was inaugurated, there's a story that they just threw this massive bash at the White House and essentially invited everyone. And the party went on for like 3 days. You can find online lists of the alcohol and liquor that was available, and it's just it would put any frat boy's kegger to shame. Now, I do want to acknowledge that Andrew Jackson did a lot of horrible things. Trail of Tears, oppression of minorities. He was a slave owner.
Didn't he also get challenged to a duel while president and go out, get shot by the guy, and then kill the guy, and then continue on being president?
That sounds right. I'm not 100% sure, but I think he was banned from a couple of states because he couldn't stop getting into duels. He wasn't I wouldn't say he's a role model, but there were some aspects of his presidency that were, I think, could improve the current state of politics.
Okay, so it was before he was president, but in 1806, he killed a man who accused him of cheating on a horse race and then insulted his wife.
There we go. I mean, if you can't kill a man who accuses you of cheating in a horse race, then what America are we living in?
The question is, would Andrew Jackson accuse someone of cheating if they're using a clone horse?
You know what? I bet he'd think. I bet he would consider clone horses cheating.
Yeah.
I've never met him, but I'm just guessing.
Well, interesting choice. Interesting choice. Didn't he also abolish the Bank of America?
That was a huge thing. Was abolishing the bank, which I can't tell you why, but when I was younger, I used to think that was just the greatest thing any president had ever done. And now looking back, I'm like, central banks are important.
Central banks are important. Yeah, didn't that cause massive amounts of problems economically for the next 50 years?
Yeah, I mean, it caused some shocks, but throughout the 1800s, we had they called it a panic, an economic panic. We had a panic about every 15 years just based on over speculation. But to be fair, I think a central bank is the kind of institution that could help cut down on that. But it's not like we can go back to 1820 and be like, hey, cut it out.
Well, we can come to 2018, look at all the libertarians who are saying we need to abolish the Fed and say, hey, look back to Andrew Jackson. Shut up. It doesn't work.
The Fed is the only thing standing between you dying in the muck with rotten teeth at the age of 30. That's an exaggeration. But the Fed is important.
Hey, were old people in the 1930s only 30 years old to you?
No, I mean, without improvements in... Yeah, what? Well, we can move on. We can move on.
Basically Britain.
All right. Well, we got more questions from Christy. You want to hear those?
Yeah, excuse me.
All right. So she also asks, which constitutional amendment are you most passionate about?
Well, you start us off here.
Oh, man, I hadn't really thought about this. My gut says 14th. Due process. That's the right one, right?
Yeah, well, it's 5th and 14th.
That'd be embarrassing if I did that 2 weeks in a row. Yeah. No, but due process of law is really something that it's a small phrase, but it has really shaped the law that forms the basis of the civil rights movement as it stands now.
I'd agree with you, and plus, due process is a nebulous aspect of American jurisprudence that, in my opinion, has shaped our entire, endeavor. How the government interacts with us. It's all about due process. So I definitely think. Now, to be fair, Fifth Amendment due process applies to the feds. 14th Amendment due process applies to the states. So both, I think, are very important for different reasons. I'd have to say the first is the one I'm most passionate about, because over and over and over again, the Supreme Court has stated that the First Amendment is paramount to the existence of a free society.
Right.
And something that is unique about America, and look, I'm not gonna lie, I hate Nazis, but Nazis get to believe what Nazis believe in America.
Right.
In England, in France, I don't know about England, but in France and Germany, they have outlawed that ideology. It is illegal to think that way, to think those things in those countries. And so I whenever the Charlottesville and all this other stuff was happening, people were like, why do we let this happen? Why do we let Nazis protest? Why do we let Nazis speak? This is despicable. They almost ruined the world once. And, even though I agree with everything they're saying, even though not Nazis, the people who are arguing against the Nazis, but even though I agree with them on that these are terrible people saying terrible things, our Constitution requires us to not prevent them from saying it. We don't get to step in and say, no, this content's okay, that content's not okay. You don't get to say that. When it comes to content, people have the right to believe, think, what they believe, what they want. And I think that's important, because no matter what institution, no matter whatever time period, people tend to say, hey, if you don't believe like me, you're wrong. And it's not a far jump to go from you're wrong, shut up, to you're wrong, you are now in jail.
Yeah, when Trump talks about locking up journalists, that's kind of what it smacks of. But you're absolutely right about that. People, a lot of times, they don't understand that it's important to allow people to believe what they believe. And the alternative is to have the government step in and say, you can't believe that anymore. And that's thought police. That's 1984. Police.
Yeah.
And while I think that a lot of those ideologies are despicable, it's very important that we allow them to exist, because prohibiting them only encourages people to seek them out.
That's true. Well, and as our Supreme Court has very wisely identified, we believe in what we call the free market of ideas.
The marketplace of ideas.
The marketplace of ideas.
That could be the subtitle to this podcast.
It could be the subtitle. But at the end of the day, we have to allow these ideas to float in the marketplace and let them survive, stand, or die on their own.
Sounds like you're pro-market when it comes to ideas, but anti-market when it comes to markets.
No, I'm anti-market when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to profiting off of people's, well-being and health. I personally think that was a bad decision on us. I understand that capitalism has a lot of benefits with regards to the use of resources and, now with regards to consumerism, I don't know if that's necessarily the best with regards to the future of our society and culture, because we have a shit ton of phones out there that are never going to be used again. They're sitting at the bottom of some, dump that'll be mined in 30, 40 years whenever dump mining is a big thing. But, we could use those for better purposes, in my opinion. But I mean, I got a cell phone, I got computers, I've got all these fun gadgets too. So I don't want to be hypocritical and say that I hate capitalism completely. I benefit from capitalism, but with regards to the healthcare, no, that doesn't need to be there. We need something better than capitalism when it comes to taking care of people's health.
Question: maybe instead of the marketplace of ideas, we could change the name to be the dump mine.
The dump mine. I mean, I think that's just all of the alt-right, but well, I mean, a buddy of mine have talked about this before, how there's so much rare earth metals in these laptops, computers, phones that are obsolete after 3 years of using them. That raw material can be used again. That's why they have those recycle bins at every Walmart to buy your phone back, is they can still use that raw material.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one day it's going to get to the point where we don't have any more rare earth metals. I mean, rare is in the name. So we got to find it somewhere. And every single one of our cell phones, our computers, our GPSs, and now our cars have these, rare earth metals in them. And we need them to function now. So it's a problem. I think that like a very large percentage of the Earth's rare earth metals are all in China too. So
right, they're the leader in exporting them. But before we get to our last question, I want to see if I can change my answer about the my favorite amendment.
Okay.
I'd like to say that the one that I'm most passionate about would be the 21st Amendment.
I mean, hold on. I know what the 26th is.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to guess what the 21st. I'm going to say that it's the end of Prohibition.
You're exactly right.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment, which is prohibition.
Okay, is it not a little bit humorous that the drinking age is 21 and the 21st Amendment was repealing prohibition?
Hey, I never made that connection before, but why not?
That's funny. Well, at the time it wasn't 21. That came like in the 90s.
Yeah, that's true. Well, to wrap up viewer questions, we got one last one. It's a doozy. Aaron, what was your favorite class in law school?
I think that, and I'm weird, so I'm going to go ahead and give that preface.
We know.
My favorite class was antitrust.
Antitrust.
Antitrust was hands down my favorite class in law school, just because number one, it's dealing with an aspect of capitalism that breaks a system, monopoly, collusion, cartels, all this stuff. And so I was an economics major. I studied economics. Coming in and then seeing how the law addresses these broken systems like monopolies, monopsonies, and stuff like that, that was really, really fascinating to me. And how antitrust law has been used throughout our history also was really, really interesting. Antitrust formed how or shaped how the professional sports industry developed in our country.
Wait, so is this why you picked TR? Because he was the trust buster?
No, I didn't even think about that. But another good point. I also we'll just tie those together. So, but yeah, antitrust. That was the one that really got me. I was really interested. I loved the topic. All the reading wasn't burdensome. Toys R Us one time got sued, I think, for antitrust.
Huh.
So I just remember reading a case about Toys R Us. But what about you? What was your favorite class in law school?
Favorite class?
Was it family law whenever we were both like surfing the internet and acting like we were typing?
Oh, man. That was family law was a trip. Family law was pretty great. I shudder to tell the story on the record.
Just tell it. It's funny.
But Aaron and I sat next to each other in family law, and we both brought our laptops every day, and we'd be typing. And Aaron, normally, he wouldn't really be paying that much attention.
I'll be honest. I'll tell on myself. I did not like family law. Was not where I was interested in practicing. Was not my thing. So I was not super focused.
Yeah. So, for the most part, you look over at Aaron and he's doing his thing. And I think what he would do is he would kind of go off of my cues. And when I would type, he would type to make it look like he was paying attention. And there was one day that I wasn't paying attention either. I was just chatting with somebody over instant message, and I'm furiously typing. And I look over and Aaron is furiously fake typing. And we're the only two people in the class doing it. Then we get out, and I'm like, "Hey, man, I'm sorry to tell you, but I wasn't paying attention."
It's funny.
But that was the class where I learned that the rules on who can and cannot be a wedding officiant in Texas are extremely lax.
Both of us are officiants. We've actually both.
As a result of that class, both of us have become ordained ministers. The Universal Life Church of Monastery.org. Shout out. Next episode brought to you by them.
I will say this. Whenever they've got a great racket going on because their website is advertised on the Texas government website about weddings.
Is it really?
It is. It said if
genius.
You don't want to have a religious wedding or a judge perform it, you can have one of your friends by going to this website and having them get their license. So they're advertising on the government website for them.
Genius. It's genius.
Genius.
But I wouldn't say that was my favorite class. I think actually my favorite was arbitration, which is another kind of strange one. And I liked it because it was simple, it was clear cut. We had a good professor, and then you and I, that was another class that we took together, and that was the only class that I actually wrote an outline for.
Yep.
And to all of you non-gunners out there, what an outline is for finals in law school, what you're supposed to do is create a master outline of what the class was about, all of the pertinent information
and
cases and such. And the idea being that if you spend that much time assembling all that information, then you're gonna know it front to back. Well, that's what the 1% does, and the rest of us 99%ers, we just get those outlines from the people who make them and study them. And so that was my usual MO, but you and I actually sat down and wrote an outline
because it was the first year that this professor had taught this class,
and we couldn't get one. Was that
there were no outlines?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so I remember I went over to your apartment. I brought my studying whiskey, and we sat down and we wrote an outline. And I think we both get A's. I
think I got a B+, you got an A, but our outline actually got handed down as the outline for the class.
Yes, it's a little bit sad, but that was my one accomplishment for law school. I was not on law review. I didn't make any of the mock trial teams. I was horrible at moot courts. I completely cratered in my big trial, but my arbitration outline was used at least in the next quarter.
Yeah, it's a good feeling. Also, for those of you who didn't go to law school, a gunner are the people who hide the books from everyone else in the library so that you can't study while they've already got all the information for themselves. So that's a term of art once again.
There we go. Yeah, we didn't really run in those circles. Aaron a little bit more than me. But
you say that I didn't run in the circles more than you?
No, you did run in those circles more than me. My group of friends in law school, we were like the island of misfit toys.
I'm friends with everybody. All right.
Yeah.
That's my personality.
Yeah. I'll admit I was the first person in my section to get kicked out of a class. So for the rest of my time there, I was the dunce. I might as well have been wearing a cap that said "Kick me, I'm an idiot," because that's how everybody else treated me from that day on. And I wish I'd known that before I didn't study enough and then got kicked out. But yeah, that's what happened.
Yeah, no, law school is a different animal, and until you're there, you don't even know what you're in for.
And then once you get out, it's a completely different world. Law school has nothing to do with the practice of law.
No, it has to do with teaching you to think like a lawyer. At least that's what they tell you.
Oh, it's 3 years of Stockholm syndrome to convince you that this was all worth it.
Which is worse because at Baylor, that's where they come hard at you and just take you to practice court, and you read. You read 300 pages a night. You're getting called on every day. I mean, it's intense. Then you're not getting called on every day, but it's intense that last year.
I was such an idiot. I didn't even realize the whole practice court thing. I got my offer and I accepted it, and they were like, "Yeah, we have this practice court thing that really prepares you." And I was like, "That sounds awesome." And then I get to orientation, and they're like, "Oh no, they're gonna beat the shit out of you for 6 months." Not physically, but emotionally and intellectually.
Have you ever wondered what mental anguish is?
Yeah, exactly. And I was probably halfway through my first year, all people are talking about is practice court, and I'm like, what did I get myself into? This was the biggest mistake I've ever made.
Well, see, at least your father didn't have the same practice court teacher as you, because I got called out by name. It's like, "You're Tim's boy." I was like, "Oh man."
Oh jeez.
So now we've kind of segued there for a little bit, but thank you for our viewer question this week.
Yeah.
Hopefully that gave you some insight into our opinions about the Constitution, presidents, and classes at law school.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Well, actually, let me ask you, Aaron, how are we doing on time today?
We're pretty long, but I even though it's long, let's go ahead and touch on this proving corruption, because I do want to hear about this.
Okay. Well, I wanted to bring up what's going on in Peru right now. in the past we've kind of talked about like cautionary tales or stuff that has implications for the U.S. This really doesn't. I just kind of think it's interesting.
Okay.
So the president of Peru, a guy named Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, so I'm just going to call him PPK, as he is known down there as well. PPK has resigned just within the last few days after videos surfaced of members of his own party offering bribes to other members of parliament in exchange for voting against impeaching the president. So they've got his supporters on tape bribing the other politicians not to impeach him.
So potentially the corruption trial for impeachment was corrupt.
Yeah, exactly. So let's back up a little bit. Let's give some context. And I think to tell the story, we've got to go all the way back to 1990. So in 1990, Peru elects a man president named Alberto Fujimori. And President Fujimori engages in what they referred to as a war on terror at that time against some guerrillas that were waging war against the government and perpetrating some terrorist attacks throughout the country and throughout the urban areas. It was a group called Shining Path. And Fujimori cracks down on these guerrillas to the point that they're killing civilians, that there were a couple of massacres against people who were completely unrelated to the terrorists. There was one famous example from 1991 where they send in the commandos to go break up a meeting of the terrorists. Well, the meeting was on the second floor, but the commandos just kill everybody on the first floor. Well, guess who was on the first floor? It was just a bunch of people having a barbecue. They had nothing to do with the terrorists. So Fujimori, he's elected president in 1990. There's some human rights violations. They try to investigate them, but then in 1995, they pass a law granting amnesty to any security forces who engaged in the war on terror. So they just shut down the investigations. In the year 2000, Fujimori has to flee the country while still president to escape prosecution. I think it's from like the Inter-American Court on Human Rights. He's got to flee to Japan to avoid prosecution. Eventually, he gets arrested in Chile in 2005, gets extradited to Peru, gets convicted, goes to jail for 25 years for these human rights violations. So Fujimori is in jail up until recently, when PPK, the most recent resigned president, what happens is on Christmas 2017, PPK pardons Fujimori. So to give a little bit of context to that, what's going on with PPK is he's elected in 2016. In 2017, evidence surfaces that he has taken bribes from a corrupt Brazilian construction firm. This is related to the Lava Jato corruption investigation in Brazil, the car wash investigation, where the president of Brazil also was impeached.
Okay.
Based on the politicians taking kickbacks from construction firms in exchange for those politicians sending government contracts to those firms. So
did that have to do with like the World Cup or something?
Well, the World Cup was involved. There was, they had to build
building project was involved. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I remember that
exactly. So PPK in Peru, it is revealed that his company has been taking payments from Odebrecht. It's a Brazilian construction firm, when he had repeatedly denied taking any payments from these people. So the Peruvian Congress introduces articles of impeachment in December. The vote fails by one vote. The vote on impeachment failed by a single vote. Then 3 days later, the president pardons the former president, Fujimori. And basically what people are thinking happened is that he exchanged the pardon for the support of Fujimori's children, who run the most influential and biggest political party in Peru at the moment.
Oh, okay.
So then So we've got the pardon that happens in, I think it was Christmas Eve. There's massive protests over the next few days. Nothing really happens, but then more evidence linking PPK to the Brazilian construction firm surfaces, and they reintroduce articles of impeachment. They're going to try it a second time. And then on March the 20th, just last week, a video surfaces of Fujimora's son offering the bribes to the other members of parliament in order to vote against impeachment. So it was the former president who got pardoned son is the one caught on, you know what? I don't think he was caught on camera, come to think of it, but he was involved in the people caught on camera offering the bribes.
So that came out.
Yeah. So that came out next day. I think PPK resigns, and the former president's son, I think his name is Kenji Fujimura. Kenji has been expelled from his party by the leader of that party, his sister, Keiko Fujimori.
Okay, I'm just curious. Are there a lot of Japanese people living in Peru? Like, because these all sound Japanese names.
Yeah, the Fujimoris are of Japanese descent.
Okay. When you said that he ran off to Japan, I started thinking that. I was like, that's a really weird place to go with a name like Fujimori being from Peru.
Mm-hmm. No, there's actually something that people don't really realize is that there's a large Japanese community in a lot of South American nations.
Really?
Yeah. In fact, the largest Japanese community outside of Japan is in Brazil.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a whole area of Sao Paulo that I can't think of the name now, but there's this whole neighborhood that it's nothing but Japanese shops and restaurants, and the streets even have these street lights that are like, you know, quintessentially Japanese, but you're in the middle of Sao Paulo.
Is there a reason for that transplanting? Like, was this because of like their world domination goals during World War II? Or like why South America? That just is really interesting to me.
I think it's I might be talking out of my ass again, but
you've been doing that a lot lately.
We can make this a regular segment. Jay talks out of his ass, but I was under the impression that it a little bit had the same reasons as why there's a lot of Germans in Argentina that showed up around like 1945, 1946.
So just like escape the consequences of the war.
Right. But I think there's also there's a lot of natural resources in South America. And so there's a lot of business ties.
Okay. Well, very interesting.
But even PPK himself, I mean, his name's Pedro Pablo, but his last name is Kuczynski, because I think his parents were Polish. So there's South America is a very interesting place because it's a melting pot, a melting pot in a lot of those same ways that America is, that the United States of America is. But the percentage of the population that is indigenous is far higher in South America. So there's both more recognition of those indigenous populations, but there is also more friction between the groups than we see here.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting place.
Well, as you said, Andrew Jackson and the Trail of Tears kind of took care of that.
Yeah, you know, we had a nice little genocide up here, and as a result, we have exterminated a population that had a rich culture and history that we could have learned from, but instead it's gone.
Yeah, that goes back to the eugenics of the 19th century and 1800s, all that stuff. I mean, human beings are terrible.
Yeah. What are you going to do? Human beings are terrible.
Well, we can all hope that they can do better. We've at least over the last 100 years tried as a society to do better.
That makes me think of Mac on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where he says, "Everybody's dying, Charlie. Let's go eat some fruit."
Yeah. Was it the other one like that Mac said? It was something like you can't eat like fatty foods and not exercise and expect to have abs. Look, with God, all things are possible. Well, very good. Well, that's interesting. And definitely because of all the talk of impeachment here and all the business ties and stuff that's going on with Trump, I think it is something we should be watching because we honestly haven't gotten to impeachment yet. You know, we haven't gotten to the point where we have the hard evidence. It's more speculation still, but that slow train Mueller is rolling hard. So hopefully we'll get to have our impeachment proceedings pretty soon.
You know, I started this segment by saying that this wasn't a cautionary tale, but I think that's at least in regards to Peru and its war on terror. I think that could be a cautionary tale. I think history absolutely repeats itself, and Peru had a failed war on terror where they subjugated their own citizens and they violated human rights, and then we did the exact same thing 10 years later.
That's true.
And you know, I've just now started watching the Ken Burns Vietnam War documentary recently.
Oh yeah,
and I definitely recommend it to anybody. And especially in the first episode, they do this a very good job of intercutting between the history of the French involvement in Vietnam from, you know, the 1850s up until the 60s. They intercut that immediately with what we did ourselves in the 60s and 70s. To show that we made exactly the same mistakes that they did right after them. Well,
weren't we going to bring back the Vietnamese colony under French reign? Wasn't that our involvement at some level?
That's how it started, but the French pulled out in '61, and we stayed.
And then was it like a guy in a little like speedboat shot at a giant U.S. cruiser and we decided to go to war? Isn't that how it started?
Well, I think what you might be referring to is the Gulf of Tonkin incident.
Yeah.
Where some U.S. Navy vessels allegedly were fired at by the Vietnamese, which justified a bigger U.S. response. But in reality, what happened was we were already there. We were already fighting, and our politicians hid it from the American people. And then they needed a they were like, this is going to come out eventually. They're going to find out. We also need to step up this war, and we need to sell it to the American people. So Gulf of Tonkin. Like, I think that's what the Pentagon Papers were about how the Gulf of Tonkin stuff was all fabricated.
There's so much stuff in our history that we don't even know, you know, how things affected each other.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's good. Well, that is the end of our episode today. We already did our social media call-outs earlier, but again, our Gmail is arbitrarycapriciouspodcast@gmail.com. Our Twitter handle is @arbcappodcast, and you can contact us with the hashtag arbcap. Is it arbcap or arbcap podcast?
Arbcap pod.
Arbcap pod. On Twitter, send us a message, send us an email, send us a question. We will address it and answer it next week. Also, if there's any topics that you guys want to hear our thoughts on, you know, send it to us. We'll do research. We'll look into it. And we will give you our arbitrary and capricious answers.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening. We have been overwhelmed by the positive response that we've gotten from our listeners, and I want to say thank you to you. Thank you for hanging with us, and I hope you're enjoying it, and we'll see you next week.
And hopefully the next week will not be as long as this week.
Yeah, maybe not. We'll see.
Anyway, signing off. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Jay.
Have an arbitrary and capricious week.